Okay, so the last thing we discussed was that you have to say lech chazek kni. If there are three ways of being kind of something, but if you are going to be kind with a kinyan chazaka, you have to say to him, you have to give him instructions. Lech chazek kni, go out and be kind of. But if it's befanov, if the vendor was actually standing there, even though he didn't give you the instructions, go and make a kinyan, you're kind of anyway. So boy Rav asked the following question. What about matana? If Reuven is gifting to Shimon a property, what would the din be then? Hey, what would the din be then? In other words, do you also have to say Lech Chazek Kni? I told you I'm going to gift you this property. Do I have to now give you instructions to make a kinyan chazaka, or do you have the right just to go and make the kinyan? Omar Shmuel said, "Might boy Leila Abba." I don't understand. I don't understand what's bothering Rav. Because hashta, let's think common sense. Now, Uma, we're Dafnun Gimel Amud Aleph, to the top of the page. Uma Mecher, when it comes to a sale, the Kiyoiv Lezuzi, when it comes to a sale, you gave the entire money over, but in a place where you normally write a star, whatever it is, so you weren't kind of yet the property with the money. And the din there is, if he instructed, if the vendor said to the purchaser, go out there and make a king of chazaka, fine. And he lied. But if not, no. So matana, in the case of matana, where he did not receive any money, surely he has to give you instructions. Nu and Rav. Actually, what was Rav thinking? Why does he think by matana you don't even have to give instructions? You can just proceed and make a kinyan. Rav saw, but he holds man diyoiv matana ba'ayin yafayoiv. When you give a gift, you're always very generous. We had a machlekes Rabbi Kiva Chachamim. We actually had it before as well, but we'll have it later on in the Masechta. If somebody sells, a house, does he also sell other trappings with it as well, or just the house itself? All around it. When you're selling, are you being very generous? Are you being very sparse? But everyone agrees when I'm gifting something to someone, I'm doing it out of love. If I'm doing it out of love, I want to give them as much as possible. So therefore, Rav says, if I'm giving you a gift and I'm being very generous, of course, I don't have to give you every single instruction. It's yours. Go ahead and do whatever you want. Shmuel says, when do we say that if you gift something to someone, you're being generous? Once we've established that the gift belongs to that other person. But that is the very question here. Since you said you'll give him a gift, but you haven't given the person instructions to make the acquisition, maybe you want to reserve the right to change your mind. So therefore, he has to instruct him, Lech Chazek Ukni. Says the Gemara further, now, we learned before, chazak is made up of three things. Nol, poratz, v'goda. Nol means, big machlekes is showing you what actually nol means. Nol means generally, the literal translation is to lock up. But the big machlekes is showing you, what does nol mean? Does it mean just locking the door? Placing a lock on the door, that's no. That shows that I'm the balabos, I own it now. Or no means you actually had to build a lock. You had to build something in the door. Because those Rishonim say that just locking the door is known as Mavriach Esa'ari. The din is, I have a mitzvah to help you out. If I see that you're about to incur a loss and I easily can prevent that loss from happening, that's called Mavriach Esa'ari. So therefore, Tosfos argues with the Rashbam, and Tosfos says that just locking the door, you're doing your mitzvah of preventing some outsider coming in. That's not a chazaka that shows ownership. The Rashbam says just by closing the door, that's good enough. And why? So other Rishonim say, in defense of the Rashbam, Mavriach Esari is when you are focused on one possible danger. So you do something to prevent that from happening. And the danger is imminent. When you're locking the door, you're locking the entire world out except yourself. What greater sign of ownership is there than that? So they therefore argue and agree with the Rashbam that it is a sign of ownership. The Rashbam then also discusses a key. What about transferring the key of the premises? Is that, that generally when you're buying something, is that also a form of kinyan chazaka? And the Rashbam says definitely a key. The transfer of a key is a form of a chazaka. And we actually had in Psachim Davdalit that we had a discussion. of a renter and the landlord, who has to go ahead and check the house of chametz? If they're, let's say the landlord transferred the property on the 14th day of Nisan, so we said it depends who had the key. It depends about the key. You see, clearly the key is a form of a kinyan. Other Rishonim disagree. They say kinyan is definitely not a kinyan. And sorry, and the Rashbam, therefore, what do you call it? It says the reason why over here we don't mention a key is because we're talking about the property of a convert, and he's dead and he has no family. So who is going to transfer you the key? That's why we don't mention key. And other Rishonim disagree. They say, and this is a machlekes in a few besechtes and Bava Basra and in Psachim and other places. They say that a key is definitely a sign of ownership. It is sorry, a key is not a sign of ownership. You have to do something. Chazak is you have to build something, as we're going to discuss a number of examples of what a chazak is. So that's no. So the Gemara's question is, v'kama, how much do you have to do in all of these things? No paratz or gadol. Paratz is you made a hole in the fence, and gadol is, or you fixed the hole, and gadol is you made a fence, or you raised the fence. How much do you have to do in each of these cases? As Gemara says, kol shuhu, doesn't matter how much, the slightest amount, as long as you show balabatushkai that you're the balabas, you're the owner, that is good enough. Shmuel, like Shmuel said, Shmuel said, Godar, if somebody makes a fence and get him, if he made, there was already we'll see in a minute, even there's a kosher. Now, what do you mean by kosher? So Shmuel says, Godar get the v'shlim la'asara. There was already a fence there, and you added it up a bit higher to make it 10 tefachim. That's what Gedder is, and we'll discuss that in a minute. Or Pardatz Pirza, there was a breach in the fence, and you made it wider. Today, Sheikhanas, to make entry easier, the Yetze, or to go out, to exit, Harezu Chazak. So the slightest amount is good enough. So Gemara's going to ask now, what do you mean by the slightest amount? What are we talking about? Let's say previously you couldn't really go over. You couldn't go over the fence to go inside, and and now also you cannot go over the fence. So my oven, you made it a bit higher. What's the point? Already previously the fence served the purpose as being a fence. Previously you were able to, let's say, climb over the fence. Now you cannot climb above the fence. Then two of it. Why do you call that a mashu? If you now made it serve as a fence, then what's the why mashu? Says the Gemara. Previously, you were able to climb over the fence easily. By raising the fence, now it's a bit more difficult. You can still climb over, but it's much more difficult. So therefore, we call it, you did a mashahu, because people can still, you can still climb over the fence, but you just made it that much more difficult, and that's enough to show bala batishkai. That's one example. High pitch. So now we talk about a breach in the fence. Says the Gemara, we're daf nun gimel amar aleph, right in the middle of the page. High pirza. This breach, heichi dami. This breach. What are we talking about? What exactly did you do? Previously, the opening, there was a gaping opening in the fence, and you could walk right in. You made it a bit wider, so now you can walk in as well. He didn't do anything. Why do you call it mashu? Let's say previously the opening in the fence was very narrow, you couldn't enter. And now you made it wider so you can walk in and out. It's not just mashu, you did a lot. Say, well, no, tzichin you were needed for. Previously, it was, you could go in, but you have to squeeze your way in, wiggle your way in. But now it's easier to walk in. So therefore, you didn't really create an opening, it was there before. But you did a mashu, and that's sufficient to show you're a balabos, you're the new owner of this property of Hefker. We're talking about a property of a ger, that is Hefker. But the same thing would apply if you bought a property and you made a kinyan. What about Nosan Tzroid? We'll soon explain exactly what he means, but this is what he says literally. Rabasi says, Nosan Tzroid, you placed a pebble, there was a hole there, and you placed a pebble to fill that hole. Or, not Tzroid, or there was a fence there, and you took a pebble out from the fence. Is the hoil and not to serve a hoil, and you helped out. That's a chazaka. That's a good of chazaka. Either you fill the hole with a pebble, or you remove the pebble from the hole in the fence. That is a chazaka. So you want to mine nos and mine not to. What are you talking about? What exactly did you achieve by filling the hole with a pebble or by taking it out? Elema, are you telling me that the case is as follows? Nosan he placed a pebble in the wall. The Sochar Maya, he saw a river was coming in, overflowing its bank, breaching its banks, coming towards this property, which had a fence around it. And there were a couple of holes in the fence. What you did was you blocked those holes. You put a stone in there to block the water from coming in. and so that's what you achieved. And in fact, what you achieved was that the field shouldn't get flooded, and the entire crop should be ruined. The and he helped prevented the water from coming in, or not outside, he took away a stone. The apik there was, let's say, a lot of water in the field. The water couldn't escape. It was ruining the entire crop. So you pulled a stone out of the fence, and the water then seeped out. So you saved the field. Then, but you didn't do anything with the field itself. You prevented an extraneous object from ruining the field. That's the classical case of Mavriach Hari. Hi Mavriach Hari, it's a mitzvah of Avodah Yisrael that if you see someone else's property is being threatened, and if you can save it, you should save it. In fact, we learned the whole thing. If you spend money, whether you can go and retrieve, you can retrieve your money or not. It's a Mavriach Hari and so therefore, how is this a chazaka? I stopped something, water from coming in and ruining a field, but I didn't do anything with the field itself to show ownership. Where's the ownership here? So what Rabbi Yechon mean? What happened was Nosan Tzroi. What he did was he placed in a stone, and the Tzambalamai. On the contrary, there was water inside the field. You put a stones in the walls, so the water shouldn't escape. So the water should sit there and seep into the soil, so that it should improve the quality of the soil. So here what you're doing is you're actually improving the field. Or not outside, or for example, you took out the stone, the more water can come in. That in both of these two cases, what you did was you improved the field itself. That is an example of chazaka where you do something to improve the field. Another din, a number of din we learn now about chazaka. Rabbi Asi said the name of Rabbi Yechanan, stay sodus. We had in the Gemara and other Gemaras that sadna we had in Kedushin, where we learned in the Chavav, there are all kinds of Kedushin in other places. So we say sadna the arachad, which means that the entire envelope of the world is one piece of property. Everything's contiguous to each other. It's one big piece of property. So if I'm going to buy 10 fields from one person, I make a chazaka on one of the fields and I acquire all 10. It's a valid kinyan for all 10 fields. But the Gemara then places a condition. Provided you paid for the entire all 10 fields. If you only paid for 5 fields, then the kinyan is only valid for those 5 fields. But if you paid for all 10 fields, then that one kinyan is kind of all 10 fields. So here we have a case where there were 2 fields. We're talking about now a convert, so that he passed away and he has no family. So the fields are now hefker. There's no one selling it to you. There's no money changing hands. The fields are hefker. 2 fields there. And side by side. So stay sadis to 2 fields, but what divided these 2 fields? There was a marker there was a boundary. And we looked at it a number of times. In those days, a boundary was like a bunch of rocks that was raised, or there was like a ditch, that therefore it was a clear separation between these 2 fields. So then, you made a chazaka on one of the fields. You dug a hole there, somebody made a chazaka in the fields. And you're kind of that particular field, but you're not kind of the other field. Why? Like this: if there wouldn't have been this meitzar in between them, you kind of, what this separates the 2 fields. It would have been one big field. You'd have been kind of the whole lot. But because there's a meitzar between them, it's as if it's 2 totally separate fields. Okay, so that's case number 1. So therefore, and the rule is going to be as follows. In order to make a kinyan, two things have to happen. And this is the key to understanding the Gemara. You need to do a physical transaction. Somehow, either you pay money, or you write a document, or you make a chazaka, you deal with the ground. And even money, we said many times, that the meaning of the places that you have a document and the money is not the kinyan. That's number one. And the second component is you must have kavanah. You must have intention. As the famous rule, the Yavamas we had, if you were not aware that this property was hefty, and you worked there and you toiled there and you plowed and everything, but you were not aware that it was hefker, and someone else comes along and just turns the soil over a little bit, that second person is kind of, because even though you made the mice of a kinyan, you didn't have the kavanah. Kavanah is pivotal to kinyanim. In fact, there's a chakira in Achrayim. How do we understand the relationship between kavanah and the transaction itself, the mice of the kinyan? One view is that what actually makes the kinyan is the kavanah. I want to buy, he wants to sell, or she wants to sell, and therefore that's the kinyan. But how do we know what your kavanah is? No one could read thoughts. So the mice of the kinyan is only proved to us what your kavanah is, but it's the intention that makes the kinyan. The other way of learning is no, it's the actual action that makes a kinyan. But when does this action constitute a kinyan? If you had intention to be kinyan, but it's the action, and there has now a lot of halachas. Anyway, so what happens if you had liknois? So no gimel base on top of the page. What about liknois oisav es chavata? You had in mind to be kind of both fields. The problem was that there was this boundary in between that completely segregated two fields. Oisa kana chavata lekana. You acquire this field, but you're not acquiring other field. Why not? Because it's a separate field together. You didn't make a kinyan in that second field. What about liknas? You were standing in field A, making a kinyan in field A, and you're having in mind field B. Then not only you're not kind of field B because it's a separate field, you're not making a kinyan there, but neither you're kind of field A. Why not? I dug the hole here in field A. You're not kind of because your intention was not to be kind of field A. And as we just said, you need intention and you need the kinyan itself. So Rav Zayda asked the question, what about you made a chazak in one of the fields, and you had in mind likna oisa to be koina it, and the eis hameitza, you also had in mind to be koina the boundary. There's chabot, and you also had in mind to be koina the next field. The question is, do we look at this boundary as it's separating the fields, or that it's combining the fields? How do we view the boundary itself? Do we look at it as it's ancillary to this field, or do we look at it as totally independent from the field? It's a boundary. And therefore, if you're not making a kinyan with the boundary itself, how are you going to be kinyan? Do we say, Meitza da'ara chadhu, the kani? Do we say that the boundary is there to support the land, and therefore the boundary is like ancillary to the land? It's like the reins of an animal, that you pull the horse, you kinyan the reins with it as well. Or do we say no? That the boundary is totally separate from the field itself. You were kind of the field, but you're not kind of the boundary. And surely you're not kind of the second field. Peku, we remain with a question. So boy, Rabbi now more questions about chazak. Blaza asks, what about the following case? Instead of making a chazak in field number A or field B, you made a chazak in the boundary itself. Liknois stein, to be kind of both. Do we say hi mates at afshadaru? Do we say that this mates is ancillary to, it's like the reins of an animal, it's ancillary to the ground? So if you made a kinyan the mates, the kind of all the fields. The boundary is totally independent from the fields, and you're not paying fields at all. Take we remain with the question. Amr Nachman said the name of Rabbi Shnei Botim, you have two houses. You have two houses. One house was inside and one house was in the exterior. The only way, so that outside house has really no relation with the inside house. But the inside house, the only way you can get in and out the inside house is by going through the outside house. Okay, now both these houses belong together. Now they're both hefker, and you want to make a kinyan to acquire it. So they put pens. Shnei botim zelif. You have two houses. One house inside, one house outside. Is sorry, what's the place? A herzig bechitzen. If you made a kinyan chazaka on the outside house, then konu, konu, you are kind of the outside house, but you're not kind of the inside house. Why would you be? You only made a chazaka on the outside house. What about liknois oisoi the esapnimi? You had in mind when you're working on the outside house, chazaka on the outside house. You also wanted with this chazaka. Let's say you fix the doors, whatever. You want with that chazaka also to work on the inside house. Chitzen kana, so you're kind of the outside house, but primi like kana. But you have nothing. It's totally unrelated to the inner house. The inner house is not subordinate to the outer house. So how were you meant to be kind of the inner house by making repairs on the outer house? Okay. What about if you, while you were standing in an outside house, you had in mind to be kind of only the inside house, then the inside house for sure you're not kind of because you didn't make a kinyan with it. But neither nor are you kind of the outside house. Why aren't you kind of the outside house? Because you didn't have it in mind. As we said before, it's not sufficient to make a kinyan. You also have to have that intention. But your intention was not to be kind of the outside house. Your intention was to be kind of the inside house. So that you did not make kinyan in either house. What about Herzig Bipnimi? You made a chazaka on the inner house, liknoisei, to buy that, then kanu. Then, of course, you're kind of the inside house, but you're not kind of the outside. What about liknos oisiv esachitz? And you had in mind to be kind of both. You worked with the inside house, but the inside house uses the outside house to get outside, so the two are related. Then kana shneim, then you're actually kind of both. You're kind of both. What happens? While you're working on the inside house, they made a kinyan there. The only thing chazaka, the only thing you intended was to be kind of the outside house. Then you're not kind of anything. You're not kind of the pnimi, even though you made a chazaka, you had no intention for it. You're not kind of the outside because all you wanted to be kind of the outside, and you didn't make a chazaka on the outside. So you can't say that the outside is subordinate to the inside house because you weren't working with it. So you weren't. You had no intention to be kind of the inside house. So the outside house cannot relate back to the inside, and you didn't make a chazak on the outside house, so therefore you're not kind of either one. Amar Nachman, Amar Rabu. So Nachman said another din in the name Rabbi Rabu. Haboine paltrin gedolim benichse hageh. You build a large palace in the estate of a ger.
We just lost you.
The Hemid Lehend houses, and all he put was another person, and
we just lost you. We just lost you.
One second.
Lost your audio.
Your sound is breaking up.
Could you go back to the beginning of that section?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you, yeah.
Okay, back to the beginning. Okay. Amar Rab Nachman, Amar Rabba Baru. Haboine paltrin gedolim. If somebody builds large mansions, benichse hageh. So there was a field there that was meant to be planted, and you decided to build there a large mansion. Uba but you did, and you did not you did not place a front door. Uba came along another person, the Hemiland houses, and did place doors on it. Kana, the second person is kind. My timer, why? If we look at the first person, we said, well, all you did was you piled bricks up there. And therefore, how did you work with the ground itself? How did you work with the property of the ger? You didn't do anything with the property of the ger, no improvement. You built a house on top of that. So that's not a kinyan with the land itself. So you are not koine. Now, we have a big machlekes, an interesting machlekes Rishonim. That and that is Traces raises the issue, so doesn't understand. In order to make a house, you have to build a foundation, and if you build a foundation, you basically dug up the ground. Didn't we learn before that if you dig rafik bapurti, you just dig a little bit in the ground? That's a kinya chazaka. So every house you already dug up the ground for the foundation. So Traces therefore learns it must be talking about you didn't build any foundation here; you built it above the ground. And therefore, there was no digging here at all. I made a mistake. That's not Taisus. That's Rimagash. Taisus holds that even though, so the Rimagash says it's talking about a case where you built it above the ground. Because had you dug a hole in the ground, you would have been kinder because you dug a hole. Taisus says no. Over here, you did not, even though you dug a hole, the purpose of the hole was for the house. So in fact, you ruined the field in a way, speaking, because you cannot plant on this field. This field was meant to be planted on, plowed and planted, and so on and so forth. And therefore, since it's not considering you're improving, you're supposed to improve the estate of the ger. You did not improve the estate of the ger at all. And as far as the house is concerned, since there are no doors, it's not really livable. So you did not improve the estate at all. That's what you learn here. Even though Teza says you have a roof so you can go in for protection from the rain and all that, nevertheless, it's not a permanent home because it does not have any doors. Other Rishonim learn, no, definitely if there would have been a hole over here, it would have been considered as if you made an improvement in the karka. But what we are talking about over here is you built a house above the ground, so there's no improvement in the karka whatsoever. The interesting machlekes and rishonim. It's interesting how halacha works. Nothing to do with our Gemara, but to do with a mezuzah. Are you chayiv to put a mezuzah on the doors of your house if your house does not have a front door? And a number of them want to say, it's actually put down Shulchan Aruch as well, in the beginning of the mezuzah. A number of them want to say that because this Gemara says here, this person built a palace, but there's no front door, it's not a house. So we see a house without a front door is not a house, and therefore there's no chiv mezuzahs on the rest of the doors because you're not living in a house. And other Rishonim will make a difference between a kinyan chazaka, which has nothing to do with the house. Chazaka means you have to show ownership, you have to make an improvement, and since you didn't really finish the house, it's incomplete. And at the moment, it's not used for you can't use it for what the purpose you want to make it for, which is totally different than the laws of the hilchas mezuzah. That's what some want to say. Okay, it's in the Gemara. Okay, the Gemara says further. I might say, poultry. If somebody finds a palace, amongst the estates of the ger or the properties, there's a palace there, and he wants to acquire it. He has to make some kind of form of ownership. He went ahead and put some plaster on the wall. He made some kind of design. If he improved the house at all with some design, is kind of the tama. How big should it be? It has to be the size of an amma, so it has to be noticeable. And it has to be very noticeable. That's me. As soon as you open the front door of the house, you can see right there in the wall. Just like we say in the laws of, you have to zeichel churban, you have to remember the churban. So you have to leave a little space. Some say right by the open door, you should leave a space that you haven't yet painted properly, or people put a picture of the Yerushalayim or something of the case of my Rabbi to remind us of the churban. There's a big machlekes of shainim. So what about if you don't place it by the door? It's not a form of the kinyan at all, or the pshati like the Rashbam says that if you don't put it by the door, then you just make it larger than an amma. Amar Rambam says, I milsa the following Amali Rav Sheish. Rav told to me, and it's a big chiddush. But then he illuminated our eyes by bringing a brisa, and goes the following: Hamatzia matzois b'nichsa ger. You walk into the field of a ger, and you place their mats, and you sleep on the ground. And he wants to be kind of with that. Now you can argue what improvement did he make on the ground just by sleeping on the mats? So there's big machlekes how in the Gemara. First, I'll tell you how the Rashbam and other Rishonim learn, and that is the ground is supporting you. There are two ways. So the Shesh's chiddush is normally we learn till now chazak is you have to make some improvement in the ground or on the object that belongs to the ger. The Shesh's chiddush is that this object that belongs to the ger supports you. That is also a kinyan chazaka. So the ground is holding up the mat that you're lying on. It's a kinyan chazaka. It brings a proof from a brisa. And mahi, which brisa? The Tanya we learned, how do you acquire an evet kanani? How do you acquire a slave? And you acquire a slave by a kinyan chazaka. And what's the kinyan chazaka? The kinyan chazaka is that the master uses his slave. He leans on his slave. And that is considered a chazaka. Same thing here. Lying on the ground is a chazaka. Case of no, the slave ties your shoe. So you're not doing any. You're not working with the slave. On the contrary, the slave, the object of your that you want to buy, is working for you, and that's also chazaka. And the proof is from the entire brisa. The same thing. The ground is holding up the mats, and therefore it's a chazaka. No liminala, he tied your shoes. He untied your shoes. This is your slave. He carried for you your kalim to the base of merchis. The hivshita, then he undressed you. He bathed you. Sacha, he smeared you with oil. Gorda, he scraped some skin off, which used to be in those days. The bishi, then he dressed you up. He nearly tied your shoes. The higbiyah. Now this last thing here, the higbiyah. We're not sure what actually happened. Who picked up who? Did the slave pick up the master? Because till now we're only talking about what the slave is doing for the master. Or did the master pick up the slave? Connie, in all these cases, you are Connie. Amar Rav Shimon, we'll come back to that in a minute. Rav Shimon says, lifting is just as good. Now what's going on here? The Tanna Kama just said that lifting is good enough. What's Rav Shimon arguing? What's going on? So we're digressing for a minute. My comma, what's going on here? Hachi comma. Rabbi, if the slave, this is what the Tanna Kama says, if the slave picks up the master, kana is kana. But if the master picks up the slave, is not kana, even though we know that Hagabah, the kinyan of lifting, is kana b'chol makom. But that's things that are common. It's not common for one person to pick up another person. So if the master picks up the slave, it's not a kinyan. And Rav Shimon says, definitely if the master picks up the slave, it's also kind of. But what do we see from all of this? That the chazak is the slave works for the master. So the same thing here is where the ground is supporting you, is working for the master. That's what the Rashbam and many of the Rishonim learn. Other Rishonim have a problem with that. If that's Pshat the Gemara, then why does it talk about a mat? Just say he went to sleep on the ground. And the ground is holding him up, so he's benefiting from the ground, just like the slave. He's working for the master. The ground is working for this person, and therefore he's kind of. Why talk about mats? As a result of that, the other Rishonim Pshat here, totally different. They learned that we're talking about that you're beautifying the land. By placing the mats there, you are beautifying the land. And what we're learning from here is that even if you're just beautifying, you are also kind of. And the proof is not from lifting oil. The proof is from one case. If he puts ointment on the master, he's not repairing anything. All he's doing is something cosmetic, and yet it's a kinyan. That's the proof from that particular halacha. So the same thing is the ground holds putting the mats on the ground, even though you didn't make any actual repairs on the ground, it is a kinyan. Now, interesting here is that Rashbam says, and this is very interesting. I mean, many Rishonim argue, but I just think looking at this Rashbam, it sort of reminded me of something, another machlekes, which I think is directly linked. I didn't say anyone linking it, but I think it is. The Rashbam says, where do we learn now this kind of a chazak? Where do we learn this? Just by, according to Rashbam's shot, sitting on the ground, lying on the ground is supporting you to chazak. Where do you find such a concept? So Rashbam brings a pasuk. It says in the pasuk, you should go into Israel, conquer it, and you should settle there. So he says v'yishaftem means you should sit there. And this is how he reads the pasuk. V'yirashtem, you'll conquer the land, and you need to make a kineh chazak, in the rules of engagement that you want to acquire the land that you just conquered. So v'yishaftem, sit there. By sitting there, sitting on the land, you are koinah. That's what the Rashbam says. Other Rishonim argue. There's a famous argument, the Ramban and the Rambam, is there a mitzvah of living in Israel or not? The Ramban says there's a mitzvah in the Torah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. And the Rambam definitely does not hold it's Torah, but according to many, he holds it's midrabban. Others want to argue even that. Now, the Ramban learns it from which pasuk that there's a mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael Torah, from this very pasuk, v'yirashtem bo v'yishaftem bo. That it says in the pasuk, not only should you conquer the land, but the yishaftem bo. There's the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. You have to live there. And we had the Gemara Gittin there. How that even on Shabbos you can get a guy to write a contract to Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. There are all kinds of dinim because of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. However, the Rambam definitely does not hold his matayda. The question is midrabanan or not, as the Megillah says to want to say, and others whatever argue. What does the Rambam do with that pasuk? Suddenly now we have the Rashbam here, who says that pasuk is used for a totally different issue. about the Kenyan, the Yerashtaba. You will expel the goyim, conquer it. And how are you going to acquire it? By the Yeshaftaba. By sitting there, you acquire the land. Nothing to do with the mitzvah of living there. So it's very interesting. Perhaps that's the machlekes of the Rambam and the Rambam. Why that pasuk or the Rambam is not a proof to mitzvah Yeshivat Yisrael. Anyway, just a thought.
Michael, I can't understand. How can you say that by putting a mat on the ground and lying on it, or any of these minimal acts, you're saying that is a chazaka, that's koina, but to build a mansion, to use the land to build a mansion is not.
Very good point. And the Rishonim actually asked that question. The answer, the difference is the case of the building a mansion, that land was meant to be used as a field to grow crops or wheat or grains. So you're not using it for the purpose of what it's meant to be. So Kolzman, you didn't complete whatever something new. So all you did was you ruined its original state and you haven't done any improvement. In fact, you ruined it. Right. If you would have completed the entire mansion, so then we'd say, okay, you've transformed it to something else. But because you're in the middle, a house without a door is not a house, and you can no longer plant in that field. So they say that's why it's different. But putting mats on the ground, you didn't in any way ruin the field. You can still plant in that field. So it's an improvement, or the land is working for you without ruining the field. And that's why it's chazaka. But because it's such a chiddush, the Rashbam brought a pasuk. Because you're right, such a novel idea, just sitting on the ground supporting you, that's already a kinyan. So you had to bring a pasuk. He actually bring another pasuk as well, to support that.
It does still seem pretty hard to understand, because you are showing bailus by building this structure, building this thing, despite whether you're destroying it. I mean, if you're allowed to destroy your own property, if that's what you want to do, it doesn't matter.
But it's not a kinyan. If you destroy the kinyan chazak, if I walk in and I destroy the property, it's definitely not a kinyan chazak. You're a mazik. A kinyan chazak, no balabas would destroy his land. So if the only way you show balabas is if you're improving the land. And so, remember, the point is you're showing you're a balabas. You have to behave like a balabas. Yeah, definitely that has to be that. But it's a difficult halacha, and that's what Avshesha had to bring Bryce to prove this point. The Gemara continues. The shada lifta beipili. This person that there were cracks in the ground over there, and he threw in seeds, turnip seeds into the ground. There was already cracks in the ground. He didn't plow the soil. He didn't do anything. There's a bunch of cracks, a bunch of fissures in the ground. He went ahead and dropped in seeds, and eventually it's going to grow. The ger, property of a ger, loy havi chazak. Okay, he didn't dig any holes. He dropped in the seeds, but eventually it's going to grow. Why is that a chazaka? My time of why, more explains. When he threw the seeds in, he didn't do anything to improve the land. He didn't dig up the soil and turn the soil over. He did nothing to improve the land. He threw an extraneous thing into the land. Now, what's going to be the improvement that eventually grows? But that you didn't do, that happened by itself. That improvement happened by itself. What did you do? You have to make an improvement to show you're a balbas, and you haven't done that. So similarly, Amar Shmuel says, if somebody goes ahead and cuts down branches from a palm tree, it belongs to a ger, it's hefker, and you want to show ownership. So it depends why there's two possible reasons why you're cutting that down. Remember, intention is very important. Two possible reasons why you're cutting down the branches. One is because you want the firewood. One is sort of pruning the tree to last longer. If you're doing milking, you might be a gardener for a mazah. That doesn't show you the owner, and that's not a chazak, not improving anything. So, the pasha dikla. This one is cutting down the branches. Adai to the dikla. If you did it in order to improve the quality of the palm tree, then kani. Adai to the chayus. If you did it in order. Okay, this is not for trees. In order you did the branches in order to feed your animals, then like cutting. Again, you didn't. Sorry, the case of the tree, the branches for the wood is the next one. If you did it only to take care of your animals, then it's not considered what do you call it? As if you're improving a tree and you're not cutting it. But how can we tell? How do we know what his intention was? The idea is a second person can jump in and make a kinyan for the tree. How does the second person know whether the first person is kind or not? Shaka mahaigis or mahaigis, if you cut evenly from all sides of the tree, then obviously daita dikla. You do to prune the tree, you want the tree to be healthy. If you did all of it on one side of the tree, you only cut down one side of the tree, which means you totally disregard the health of the tree. And a daita dikla, so then you did it basically to feed your animal, take care of your animal, don't do with the tree, and therefore you're not kind. But something similar. So Shmuel says, "Hi man, the zach is a chaya." Let's say if somebody's cleaning up his entire field, getting rid of all the weeds and the junk and everything else. Again, a daita the ad, if he's doing it to improve his land, kani. A daita the tzid, if he's doing it because he wants to collect all the twigs for a fire, then like kani. He's not kani. Talking about again, it's basically behaving the same way. So heichi domi, how can we tell? Says him what again? Shakal, from his actions, we can tell. If later he says, "Look, I wanted to be kind," we don't care. If he did not behave like a balabas to improve the quality of the land, then you're not kind. You can protest, but you're not kind. So this is how we observe, we monitor his behavior. Shakal Rabbinavi Vizutra. If he took everything off. He took everything, all the big twigs and the small twigs and the useless ones. He took them all off. Then obviously, is a daita the he took it in order to improve the land so that he could plant in there again. But if you took the big pieces and you left behind the small ones, a daita the tzivah, then all he wanted was firewood if he took the big ones. The Amar, it's a similar line. The Amar Shmuel. Sorry, all these cases are very similar, so we might just finish all these cases. The Amar Shmuel. And Shmuel said, "Hi man, the askil tikla." If somebody goes ahead and tries to remove all the different things that are on the land that don't belong there, he's trying to level off the land. It should be smooth. He wants to make it level. So hi man, the askil tikla. A daita that if he's trying to smoothen it out, make it level in order to improve the land, then obviously cutting. That's a chazaka. He's improving the land. But a daita the beidori, if he's not doing it to improve the land, but he wants to build there, let's say, a threshing floor, then like kani, he's not kind of. He's not kind of. Why? Because then it's not an improvement on the land. It's to build something totally extraneous, and the word is that whatever extraneous you're building, eventually you're going to remove it. In other words, if you're going to build that threshing floor and the plan is to leave the threshing floor, then that's an improvement on the land as well. But we're talking about here, temporary. What do you call threshing floor? So then you're not kind of because you're not improving the land. No, again, hechidami. How can we tell? Depends as follows. Shakal mulya. If you took, let's say, you had a mound, you took all the sand from that mound. The shada benot, and there was a pit somewhere else further down. He took all that spare sand and he placed it in that hole. So basically, he was able to level the entire ground. Then I died to that. But obviously, he's doing it to fix the land. But mulya b'mulya. If there's a mound there, all it did was it took some of the sand off from the top of the hill and placed it around, so he should sort of bring it down a bit. And benotza. And if there was a hole, he tried to make the hole a bit smaller. Then he didn't really level the ground at all. Then a daita the beidori. He just did it to make a threshing floor. He doesn't need it to be perfect, and therefore it's not a kinyan. Again, he's not doing it to improve the land. The Amar Shmuel says, "I man the pasach maya ba'aret." Shmuel says, if he, let's say, makes an opening so that water should be able to enter the land, and he wants water to enter the land. So if he's doing it, he wants to irrigate the land so that it can grow better, have better yields. Of course, Kani, he's doing something to improve the land. But adaita the kavri, if you're doing it in a way to trap the fish, as we'll see in a minute how we can tell. If he's doing it away because he wants the fish to cut the land, water come to the land and the water to escape and leave behind all this fish, then like Kani, he didn't do anything to improve the land itself. Hey, Shidami, how can we tell? So it goes as follows. How can we tell? If Pasach Trei Babi, there's a fenced it, and he opened two openings, Chad Ma'ayil, the Chad Mapig, one of them the water enters, and the other one the water goes right out. So you don't want the water to remain. So why in the world did you open up these holes? Adai to the kabri. You want the fish to, the water brings the fish in, and then the water will escape and the fish will remain behind. If you only have one hole, then what's the idea? You want the water to come in to help irrigate the field. Then adai to the ara. And you're doing it in order to prove the land. Hayitza, there's a woman, the ochla dikla, she ate from a palm tree, but tafshicha, and placed the shana. What she did was she cut down basically one side of the tree. She cut down the branches, but only one side for 13 years. it belonged to a ger, it was hefker, and every year she would go cut down the branch, but only for one side of the tree, which we said before is an indication to us she didn't do it to improve the quality of the tree. On the contrary, she's reducing the health of the tree. She's adversely affecting it. She's doing it for her animals. Asahu, it came along another person, Rafak Tusei Purta, came along another person and dug a little bit of a hole. And he said, now the tree belongs to me. Also, the Carmelite came screaming to the lady, I'm here 13 years. I've been cutting down branches here. And this guy comes along and makes a little hole and he claims now it's his. The Amri others say, in fact, Kami de Marukva. She went to Marukva. Ukme biyade. So they both paskin that it should go to this person who came 13 years later and dug a slide hole. She began to scream and protest. On Malay, so they said to her, my abiloch, what can we do for you? You did not go ahead and make the chazaka like everybody else does. You didn't do chazaka because everybody else, if you want the chazaka, you should have cut the branches down from both sides of the tree. By cutting from one side, you demonstrate that you only want it for your animals, and therefore, you said before, you're not improving the land, and you are not kind of. Omar Rav, so Rav says, Atzor Surah Benichse Hager, if somebody goes ahead and makes a form, and Rashi says, Rashbam says that you make pictures of animals, kana, and so you're on the wall, so you improve the quality of the house, and you are kana. And we know because Rav lekana leginsa de Rav. Rav had a yeshiva and he had a big garden in front of it. That garden used to belong to a ger, and then Rav acquired it after the ger passed away. And how did he acquire it? He made Ela He made some kind of images on the garden, and that's how he was kaina. So we see that it has to be an improvement for what its purpose is. But interesting, again, how halacha works. They use this halacha, you're not allowed to draw images, and there's all kinds of issues about drawing images. But they use this halacha, you're allowed to make paintings from animals. And based on this Rashbam's chat in the Gemara over here, that Rav drew an image of an animal, and that was how he acquired the garden. Then the machlekes, entire animals, part animals, if you're allowed to be boiled sticking out, or only for shakeya, and so on and so forth. Okay, we'll pause there for